And today I'm here with Jim Feil, who's a master teacher and really amazingly experienced in teaching a variety of bodyworks and energy therapies and more. And he's coming again to Washington, D.C., to Silver Spring, Washington, D.C. area this coming fall in October to offer an in-person and hybrid, so people can join online if they wish, course. And I'm very excited to welcome you again, Jim, to the United States and to Washington, D.C., and to support this seminar, this seminar called Early Developmental Dynamics, Foundations in Building Relational and Resonant Skills in Therapy. And I'm wondering, Jim, if you could talk a little bit about yourself and what you're going to teach.
Sure. Thank you, Kate, once again for the invitation. And it's nice to be coming back to the States once again to teach. I've been teaching mainly in Europe for the last 30 years, or Europe and China, and which has been great and interesting. But there's something about coming back to the States and connecting there that I'm really looking forward to. So a quick summary of my background, the things that have really shaped my approach to this work. My earlier work was in polarity therapy. I met Dr. Randolph Stone, the founder of polarity, back in 1970. And he was a very powerful influence on me, bringing a combination of chiropractic, osteopathy, naturopathy, and then, Ayurveda and yoga and, a whole energy approach to the body. And it was very powerful. And at the time, of course, it was really a bit on the edge. But as we know, things on the edge become more mainstream as people, have more experience with them. So polarity influenced me powerfully, both in terms of the larger concept of polarity, which these days they're calling dialectic, and so forth. And then along with polarity, I studied craniosacral biodynamics. I was a good friend of Franklin Sills as he was developing his system of cranial biodynamics with his vision of the tides and fulcrums, and not that it was all part of also the osteopathic tradition, but Franklin gave it his wonderful shape. So for me, there was a beautiful combination between polarity and cranial biodynamics. And then, of course, I was a good friend of Ray Castellino's, and so I got pretty submerged in pre and perinatal. Went through I kind of assisted him in his training and so forth. And then my last really big influence was Stanley Kellerman. I studied with him for 30 years and really was inspired by his formative psychology. So over the years, what I found is a wonderful synthesis of these different influences. And in a way, what's been nice is I found the work that really resonates with me, right? A lot of us kind of, find trainings that are very interesting and very effective and very useful. And we don't so much ask the question, is this really fully resonant with who I am? And in a way, I've made choices about that because I've been exposed to so many different therapies and taken courses in different therapies. And some were really powerful and intelligent and interesting, and yet they didn't resonate with who I was. And so this mix of these 3 or 4 different modalities somehow really brought all of me to the surface, brought all of me into the work. And I think that's something people could look at more, not just what is the fashion of the day, not just what is, interesting and powerful, but what resonates with who they are. And anyway, so that's a little bit of my orientation to the work. And I could go into the details of that, but we'll do that when we have
more time. Yeah.
So basically, early developmental dynamics. We're preparing a 3-day course, so we're not going to go into massive detail around early developmental dynamics. We're going to cherry pick certain powerful elements in early development which resonate into adult dynamics and into the work we do. So, of course, looking at the whole embryological process is massive and incredibly inspiring, and gives us a lot of information about how to work with our adult, right? All the different life stages. So I'm going to, highlight a few elements from early developmental dynamics. I mean, an interesting topic, for example, is, how we go from 2 cells or a little ball of cells, and how that develops into all these amazingly complex and recognizable shapes, which we call human, right? We don't look very human in those first couple of weeks or few weeks of embryological life, but the shapes that make us human are sitting implicitly in that ball of cells. And so that's, that, and then of course that little ball of cells has to implant in mother. It has to kind of find a way through the uterine wall to implant, and mother's whole physiology needs to, welcome it, envelop it, and build the structures that enable the embryo to develop. And that's about as relational as you can get, right? So the fact that a foreign body is welcomed into mother's, into mother's body, and how that in a way is really the foundation for relationality and for resonance, right? Of course, supported by massive biochemistry, still, supported by, such a, a whole series of processes which we're still investigating and finding out about.
It's true.
But anyway, so that's kind of where we start. And then, of course, as the embryo develops, of course, as it has been pointed out, there basically are 2 sources of information that enable that cell to develop. One is each cell has its own full complement of DNA, so it's got all the information in a way that it needs within itself, but it has a place in this larger collective. And so it is constantly interacting with its neighbors, right? Gets signals of all kinds from neighboring cells, from organizer cells. And the dialogue, it's already a relational dialogue that begins to develop complexity in it, right? So that, and if you think about us as adults, we have our own DNA, our own kind of makeup, our own constitution, and yet we are continually getting information in exchange from others in terms of actually developing who we are and finding our place in the larger collective and so forth. So these are kind of metaphors in a sense, but we can really build on them beautifully, And so I think, a lot of the methodology is built on this whole, what we're calling formative process. The formative process begins at conception and maybe earlier, but we can begin there. And there is this elegant, profound formative process, which will develop into a fully blown adult human being if the conditions warrant, And of course, all the studies of trauma and the ways that formativeness, which is also another way of talking about the health of the system, the health that's never lost, how that works, and how we can support that formativeness, and how we engage the interruptions. Kellerman has a beautiful term. His early books, he talked about trauma and abuse and neglect. But he decided to start using a different vocabulary, which was distortions in form, insults to form, to keep the vision on the formative intelligence, the emergent intelligence of the system, which is a way of staying focused on the health. Yeah. And so everything else are forms that engage, interrupt, or support this primary formative urge, which is continually building, growing through all the life stages.
Mhm.
So anyway, so that's a, kind of a short summary of the context we bring to the work.
Yes. Well, we have a 3-day workshop in Silver Spring, and the dates for that are the 20th, 21st, and 22nd of October. But it will be hybrid, so people can come online from around the world if they wish. We'll be offering that and the recordings for everybody. And the 3 days are an introduction to the model, building the therapeutic alliance, and practical applications and further skill building. So I'm imagining, Jim, it will just be a combination of the information about how you work and then demonstrations and then experiential work so people can learn the skills and practice the skills. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll do what we can in 3 days, but I think what we'll do is we'll create the frame, which I think it's an interesting frame, and even though it resonates with other therapeutic models and frames, Kelman was a very original, very deep thinker,
Yes.
as were Dr. Stone and others. And so the frame is, it's its own frame, its own way of thinking about interactional and therapeutic process. And there's a question that I like as kind of a question that'll run through the whole weekend. What higher level form is currently taking shape in us as we live and grow and move through our life, right? And this is kind of built around the idea of emergence and a whole series of informational and other approaches to how we function, right? And and to a great extent, change and growth require massive amounts of information, right? And often new information. If we don't get the key information we need about how we are formed and organize our actions and behavior, things aren't going to change. And when I talk about precise mirroring, I'm talking about how the therapist, the facilitator, can support, right, this kind of formative intelligence to kind of bring in new information that changes behavior.
Yeah.
And in changing behavior, of course, it's working with the autonomic nervous system and all those elements. So I'm packing a lot into a tight little package, but hopefully what I'm saying is understandable. And of course, in the weekend, we will kind of look at the concepts. I'll demonstrate, and people will have exercises where they can certainly begin to work with some of the skills and start to build.
Yes, that's excellent. My experience of working with you, Jim, is that it's an inside-out model, but the therapist knows exactly how to meet the person in their process in such a way that the growth that people experience with the model it's just really big. It's exponential. And it's life-changing. So I'm so glad you're coming again and that we get a chance to be with you, Jim. And so we'll welcome people on the 20th in Silver Spring and online, and also for your free talk, which is coming up on the 18th of September. So thanks for coming today, Jim.
Thank you, Kate, once again, you and Brent. So.